The carrier had lost all power. Could one woman turn the tide? Dead in the water, drifting in silence with every expert on board out of answers. Crews scrambled, engineers argued, commanders paced. Then she walked in. No rank, no uniform, just denim, boots, and calm blue eyes. They didn't ask her name. They just watched as she picked up a wrench, adjusted one panel, then brought the most powerful ship in the fleet back to life alone. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit the subscribe button. It started with a low shudder beneath their boots, a tremor barely felt, like the metal bones of the ship themselves hesitated. Then came the flicker of lights, a quick snap of screens dying mid-transmission, the sudden halt of humming engines that had once thrummed with quiet, confident power. On the deck of the USS Montgomery, a carrier known across fleets for its brutal reliability and unshakable presence, silence fell like a shroud. The kind of silence that made officers glance at each other, that made junior techs freeze with fingers midair, unsure whether to keep typing or run. It wasn't just a blackout. It was something deeper. The engines were offline. Power routes failed. Backups choked. And worst of all, the carrier had already veered miles off its projected path, drifting slowly into a volatile corridor of sea. No one wanted to be caught in without propulsion. The admiral didn't shout. He never did. But when his jaw clenched and his hands folded behind his back tighter than usual, the entire engineering deck snapped to attention. His voice was calm, his words clipped. Status. No one had an answer that didn't sound like panic with a uniform on. Dead main engines, backup grid not responding, restart failed at every level. We've run emergency scripts 3 times, sir. The words dropped in sequence, and each one made the knot in every stomach twist tighter. How long before we're drifting into that storm system? Someone asked, not even bothering to sugarcoat the truth. 2 hours, came the reply, someone else muttered. If it doesn't shift east again. No one said anything after that. Eyes turned to the far corner of the room where 3 officers from propulsion huddled over schematics, pointing, shaking heads. There's a fault in the primary induction conduit, one of them finally offered. But we don't know why. It's never failed like this. Someone from logistics tried to cover the silence. We've got eyes on other vessels. Worst case, we call in a tow. Another said, we've got 2 helos prepped if we need to evac critical personnel. But the admiral wasn't listening to contingencies. He was staring at the blinking red light on the central panel. The one no one could shut off. The one that had never blinked before. The one that simply read main system offline. No override. Will a mysterious savior step up? Down in the lower levels near the auxiliary control room, the temperature was rising. Not because of any fire or breach, but because of bodies. Too many of them. Every specialist aboard had been summoned. Every rank, every credential, electricians, system analysts, propulsion officers, even 2 men flown in by chopper from the nearest destroyer. Nothing worked. They argued over diagnostics, questioned each other's patches, rerouted cables, and cursed beneath their breath. It had been over 90 minutes since the shutdown. No progress, and worse, no clear reason why. Somewhere behind the boiler access bay, a woman leaned against a bulkhead, watching silently. She wore jeans, a dark green shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and scuffed black boots that didn't match the spotless deck. She held no tablet, no badge, no toolkit. A leather bag hung on one shoulder, worn like it had seen more than sea air. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her blue eyes scanned the room the way a surgeon studies a patient flatlining mid-surgery. No panic, no emotion, just deep methodical focus. She'd been there the whole time, unnoticed, or rather ignored. At first, they thought she was a civilian contractor waiting to be reassigned. Then a liaison's assistant. Someone even assumed she was Bayside support who'd gotten caught up in the transfer manifest and never made it off. No one asked her to leave, but no one asked her to help either. Not until one of the younger techs, frustrated and desperate, muttered just loud enough for her to hear. Unless you've got a miracle in that purse, you might want to clear out. She didn't flinch. She just stepped forward slowly, her boots echoing over the metal grating, her eyes scanning the backup diagnostic panel they had long given up on. "You're rerouting through the secondary core too early," she said almost casually. Not loud enough to challenge, but firm enough to be heard. Someone laughed. Someone else rolled their eyes, but the oldest tech among them turned. "Sorry, what?" She pointed. Not at the schematics, but at a junction under the panel. "The failsafe protocol on this model assumes a coolant imbalance. If you power sequence too early, you're chasing a dead loop. It'll never reboot." The room froze. Half the people didn't even understand what she was talking about. The other half suddenly looked a little embarrassed. The lead engineer stepped forward. "And you are?" She looked at him a second longer than necessary, as if weighing whether to answer. "Just someone who's seen this engine type before," she replied. "Which engine type exactly?" He pressed. "Modified Weston Taylor 430D core with a double bay auxiliary. Same as the old Wavener class before the upgrades," she said. No hesitation. "Those haven't been used in years," he muttered. "Exactly," she said, and stepped past him toward the central control housing. "Which means no one here remembers how to bypass the startup sequence without tripping the false error on the coolant sensors." Someone tried to block her. Another tried to stop her. But by then, the Admiral had already heard. And when he stepped into that tight, hot room and saw a woman in civvies crouched beside a core that 30 men had failed to wake, he didn't ask who gave her permission. He just watched. She opened her bag. Not with flair, not with ceremony, just calm, practiced ease. A small custom wrench, a folded rag, a module connector with a faded sticker. Ghost Run 09. No one noticed that last detail. Not yet. She reached beneath the housing, switched a single inline feed, waited. The lights didn't flash. The room didn't buzz. But far below their boots, somewhere deep in the ship's massive engine heart, a low pulse stirred and kept stirring. The vibration came slow at first, like the heartbeat of something enormous waking from sedation. Faint, deep, almost imperceptible to the naked senses, yet unmistakable to anyone who'd ever known the rhythm of heavy machinery springing back to life. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Fingers froze mid-type. The hum rolled up through the steel grates, whispering to boots and ankles before echoing up spines. Somewhere near the primary diagnostic console, a green light blinked once, then twice, then it held. "She did something," one of the officers muttered. The Admiral didn't move from his position near the bulkhead. He watched the woman closely. Not her hands, which worked with surgical calm, nor her brow, which remained dry despite the heat, but her eyes. Those cold blue eyes that didn't flick once toward the blinking consoles now reacting all around her. She wasn't checking for confirmation. She didn't need feedback. She already knew. A warning chirped on a side panel. "Main core is initiating reset cycle." A technician announced, his voice not triumphant but stunned. "Backup grid sinking 82%. We've got progression." The energy in the room shifted. Heads turned toward her. Not fully, not yet with awe, but with something bordering on disbelief. The woman in civvies, with no badge, no clearance, no rank, had done what 27 Navy-qualified experts had failed to do for nearly 2 hours. Still, she didn't look up. "Don't let it complete the cycle yet," she said quietly. "You need to purge the secondary feedback line first. Otherwise, you'll be back here in 2 hours wondering why it choked again." The lead engineer stepped forward. He didn't try to reassert control. He simply crouched next to her and said, "Show me." She did. She moved quickly now, not because she rushed, but because the steps had already been memorized. She guided him through a 5-sequence override using nothing more than the onboard interface. No laptop, no external controller, no tools, but memory and instinct. He followed, and for the first time in years he stopped thinking like a senior engineer and started listening like a student. Around them the room filled with the sound of systems reawakening. Automated diagnostic tones, fans spinning up, pressure valves adjusting flow, turbine clusters stabilizing. I've got primary engine temperatures rising, someone called. Secondary turbines are active. Pressure's clean. Another shouted from the far wall. Main propulsion reports. Feed pressure is nominal. And finally, from the primary console, control re-established. Carrier propulsion is online. Repeat. We are no longer dead in the water. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the compartment, then cheering. It wasn't loud, and it didn't last long, but it was real. Hands clapped shoulders. One of the younger officers let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Another wiped sweat from his forehead and just shook his head in disbelief. The admiral said nothing. He stepped forward slowly, boots ringing against the steel floor until he stood within arm's reach of the woman who still hadn't stood up. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer right away and then Liv. "That's it for now." He studied her a long moment. The admiral had seen combat in 3 theaters, had read more clearance-only files than most in the entire fleet, had ordered men into situations they never walked out of. But something about this woman made him feel like he was being vetted, not the other way around. "You're not on any manifest. I've checked twice. I wasn't supposed to be here, but you are." She finally stood, not in defiance, not in reverence, just to match his posture. "I was transferring off a base in Roa when I got redirected mid-flight. Someone changed my destination." She turned toward the diagnostic display, now calm, stabilized, full of green across all bands. "My guess is they knew this was coming." "Who's they?" She looked him in the eye. "Do you really want the answer?" He didn't. Not yet. Word of what had happened traveled faster than any official log. Within 30 minutes, every division aboard knew the engine room had been brought back online, not by the engineering corps, but by a civilian, a woman no one recognized. Rumors bloomed. Some said she was an off-the-books contractor from Langley. Others swore she was part of an experimental tech program in 2018. A few claimed she was a legend from a unit that didn't exist. Someone who once took apart a Chinook mid-flight and rebuilt it before landing. The only thing they all agreed on was that she hadn't said more than 30 words total and that whatever she had done, none of them could replicate it. In the wardroom, 2 officers reviewed the security footage. One paused the feed at the moment she crouched beside the junction box. "You see that mark on the side of her tool?" he said. The other leaned in. "Ghost Run. I've heard that name before." "You haven't," the first one said. "That's the point. Will her mysterious past unravel a bigger secret?" Meanwhile, Liv walked alone down the portside passageway, her leather bag slung over one shoulder, her pace unhurried. She ignored the stares, the whispers, the subtle sideways glances of personnel too proud to admit awe. She didn't need their recognition. She didn't want it. Her job was done. She reached the hangar bay access and stepped inside, finding the quiet of metal and shadow oddly comforting. Beneath her boots, the deck vibrated with the living heartbeat of the ship now returned. Aircraft were being secured. Crews checked mounts. Life resumed. But she kept walking until she reached the far corner. An equipment locker long decommissioned and locked with a rusted tag. She tapped 3 times, waited, then opened it. Inside, behind a false panel, was a slim case, black, no markings. She pulled it out, slid it open, and checked the contents. 1 secured module drive, 1 sealed comms device, and a folded page with a single handwritten line. "You're not done. We just needed them to see you." She folded the note, replaced it, sealed the case again. And for the first time in hours, her expression shifted. Just a flicker, barely visible, but real. Someone knew she was alive, and someone wanted her to be seen. The admiral sat in his quarters, the lights low, the hum of the reawakened carrier vibrating gently through the floor. He wasn't looking at reports. He was staring at a still frame from the engine room's security footage. A woman crouched hand deep in a junction back to the camera, but the tool pouch slung across her shoulder bore a patch. Not regulation, faint, frayed, but unmistakable to someone who had once been read in. Not for operations, for oversight. Ghost Run. He hadn't heard that name in 12 years. The program had been folded quietly under the blackest of budget lines. Detached cells trained not to lead missions, but to end them silently when they turned. Ghost Run wasn't about execution. It was about reclamation. Technology, systems, lives, secrets, and those who carried the designation had no ID, no official birth in the military record. They operated under absolute vanish conditions. No service numbers, no medals, no funerals. Yet she was here on his carrier, and she had just restored the engine with a single tool, a quiet voice, and no documentation. He tapped his combs. Bring her in. But the channel clicked back with static. No response. He stood slowly, walked to the door, and stopped because someone was already there. She stood in silence, arms at her sides, eyes calm, not cold, just still. You're early, he said. I know. I didn't send for you. I know. He motioned her inside. She didn't move. I'm not here to report, she said. He waited. I'm here to warn. Below deck, 3 men in technician uniforms moved through the corridor outside the secondary data vault. They didn't belong. Their credentials were real, but borrowed. They spoke little. One of them carried a sealed case marked as communications calibration gear. Inside was a device capable of copying the carrier's entire operational log, engineering diagnostics, weapons readiness, and encrypted communications across the last 72 hours. They didn't know she was watching them. She had been since the moment they boarded, 2 hours after the engine rebooted, manifesting from a logistics shuttle that supposedly returned empty. They hadn't expected attention. Everyone was busy celebrating the power restoration. The crew was relieved, complacent. No one noticed the path these 3 took, avoided every checkpoint except her. She moved silently, not in the shadows, but just behind the rhythm of expectation. Always where people didn't expect relevance. It wasn't stealth. It was design. She reached the lower level 10 seconds after the vault door opened. Too late to prevent the breach, just in time to stop what came next. In the Admiral's quarters, the lights flickered. She turned toward the far wall. They're already inside. He stepped back. Who? Not Navy, not CIA, not any flag you'd recognize. You brought them here. I followed them here. He looked at her closely. Ghost Run wasn't built for surveillance. No, she agreed. We were built to disappear. So why the engine? Because it made me visible. He paused. That was the plan. She nodded. Why? She stepped forward finally, not threatening, just closer. Her voice dropped. Because someone in your command structure authorized this breach, and I needed them to believe I was part of something recoverable. He narrowed his eyes. So, you're the decoy. I'm the lit match. In the vault corridor, the first 2 men turned when they heard the click behind them. Just one. Nothing dramatic. But the third, the one holding the case, never had time to rotate fully before she was on him. The movement was pure training. Muscle memory layered over instinct. Elbow to throat, foot behind heel. One twist, and he collapsed. Air gone. The case slid across the floor. The other 2 raised sidearms, but she was already inside their arc. One kick, one redirect, and both slammed into the vault bulkhead in a heap of limbs and exhaled curses. She crouched, popped the case open. Inside, a data tether still pulsed, active. She yanked it, wiped it clean, then broke the device in half with a short, brutal twist. Someone at the other end of the line, wherever the signal was supposed to go, would receive nothing but static. By the time security arrived, the Admiral was already there. He watched as 2 Marines cuffed the intruders. He said nothing. He just looked at her. You staged the fix, he said quietly. So they'd come for the systems? No. She said, I fixed the carrier because your people deserve better. I staged the exposure so they try to steal what I protected. You played everyone. No, she repeated. I just gave them the bait. They chose their own fall. He exhaled slowly. You're not on any record I've seen. You won't find me. He looked at the wrecked case, the men being hauled away, the shattered trust now echoing through steel halls like a second silence. You're not done, are you? She looked him in the eyes. Ghost Run doesn't get dismissed. We get reassigned. The carrier cut clean through open water now. Engines running smooth, systems green, headings stable. Above deck, the sea stretched into a flat, endless horizon, calm as glass. But below, the ship felt changed, like something deeper had shifted. The tension no longer came from failing systems or frustrated engineers. It came from what no one wanted to admit, the sense that the crisis hadn't ended with the reboot. It had only begun. The sabotage attempt had been buried. Officially, the 3 men in stolen uniforms were apprehended stowaways. No logs, no press, just silence. A statement would be drafted. A narrative would be assigned. But the officers who had watched it unfold, the ones who saw the woman in Civvies choke off a systems heist with her bare hands, would not forget. She didn't fit any model of heroism they had been taught. She wasn't loud. She didn't give orders. She simply moved through the carrier like she already knew every corridor, every panel, every protocol the ship had ever hidden beneath its polished procedures. And yet, when they looked for her now, she was gone. Not off the ship, just out of reach. There were sightings. An ensign claimed to see her on deck 2, moving with a bag slung across one shoulder, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. A technician swore she passed through the drone bay mid-inspection. One Marine said he saw her just staring out at the sea from behind the radar tower, arms folded, not speaking. But no one could prove she'd ever been on the manifest. Her cabin was empty. No name on the door, no file, not even a bunk. Only the Admiral knew where she was, and he wasn't saying a word. The debriefing happened 3 decks below the bridge in a secured chamber that hadn't been used since the carrier was commissioned. It wasn't built for comfort, just function. The walls were matte steel, lined with old magnetic whiteboards from the era before holograms. The Admiral stood at the end of the long table, alone, reading from a single printed sheet. The door hissed. She entered quietly, as if summoned by instinct rather than order. Her boots left no sound. Her hands were empty. Her eyes held the same unnerving stillness he'd come to expect. I filed your name under technical support, he said without looking up. That'll keep the logs clean. Good, she replied. What did you tell DC? That it was an isolated breach. That the attackers had no internal help. She raised an eyebrow. He finally looked at her. What else was I supposed to say? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence between them said everything. That he knew the breach had come from inside the command structure. That someone high up had paved the way, cleared credentials, altered manifests, suppressed alerts, and that naming the truth would unravel far more than the credibility of one ship. You said this wasn't about the carrier, he said. It wasn't. Then what was it about? She stepped forward. Extraction of what? She pulled a small metal disc from her pocket and placed it on the table. The Admiral stared. It looked ordinary, smooth, blank. He knew it wasn't. That's a comms access node, he said. She nodded. Layered with a rolling encryption scheme no one's broken in 20 years. He swallowed. Ghost Run used these during blackout ops. Still does. You had it on you? No, she said. They did. He blinked. They were exfiltrating a protocol key, not carrier systems, not power control, something worse. He stepped back. They were going for Echo. The word hit the air like a dropped weight. Echo wasn't a system. It wasn't a weapon. It was a command layer buried under 7 shells of clearance used to silently trigger the deactivation of nuclear assets in case of field compromise. Only 4 humans had physical access to the original Echo key. The only thing worse than losing it was not knowing someone had tried to take it. How'd they even know it was here? They didn't, she said, until I turned the lights on. He stared at her. So, you used the carrier as bait number. I used myself. The carrier was just where they'd come to watch. He shook his head. You should have said something. She met his gaze. Would you have believed me? He didn't answer. She turned, stepped away from the table. Her shoulders remained square, her tone calm, but there was a different weight in her movements now. Like the burden of exposure, even in success, was heavier than the breach itself. You made a choice, he said finally. You let them see you. I had to. He nodded. And what now? She turned halfway. Now they'll run because they know Ghost Run is still alive. She looked at him flatly because they just saw what happens when we stop hiding. Elsewhere on the carrier, life resumed its rhythms. Training cycles resumed. Watch rotations normalized. The sea remained quiet. But the name Ghost Run moved like a rumor through steel. No one said it aloud. No one admitted they believed it. But when they passed the engine bay where it had all begun, when they glanced at the panel where no one but her had touched the feed, they remembered. And when they found the patch, no one touched it. It had been left behind, tucked in the corner of the diagnostics panel. Just black cloth, faded, frayed, 3-stitched lines in silver thread. No emblem, no title, just a single number. Yam. One of the crew asked the admiral if it should be filed. He said no. He told them to bolt it to the wall. No plaque, no story, just the patch. Let them wonder. Let them remember. Because silence is a better teacher than legend. At dawn, the carrier moved like it had never stopped. No vibration, no stutter, just power flowing through steel like blood through arteries. Above deck, the sea was flat and silver. The sky pale with morning. Routines resumed. Orders echoed. Coffee burned on lips. But underneath it all, something had shifted. The men didn't walk the same. The women didn't speak as freely. There was a quiet now. Not tension, not fear, but respect born from not knowing. The kind of respect that grows in the absence of explanation. No one knew where she was. She wasn't listed. Her bunk remained empty. Her tools were gone. The patch they found was the only sign she had existed at all. It hadn't been left for ceremony, just tucked into the seam beside a relay, like she expected it to be overlooked. It wasn't. Someone bolted it to the panel with 2 rusted screws. No caption, no warning, and that was enough. She didn't leave through the front. She didn't take the chopper back to base. No airstrip, no escort. She walked alone to the aft hangar after midnight when the last tech had signed off and the radar team was halfway through shift change. She moved past the racks, past the folded rotors and spare parts, past the sleeping drones draped under canvas. Her boots made no sound. The Echo was gone. She didn't bring gear, just a satchel. Inside the disk she'd taken, the data clean, copied, burned to analog, no digital trace, no uplink. She would walk it where it needed to go. When she passed through the auxiliary airlock, the night air struck her like a baptism. Salt, diesel, wind, and freedom. The carrier hummed behind her like a monument to everything she used to believe in. Not people, not flags, just function. The mechanics of power, of systems running clean. She never cared about the men who took credit, just the machines that could be trusted, the ones that obeyed only precision. No one tried to stop her. No guards, no admiral. They knew better. The admiral stood alone on the upper deck, coffee cooling in his hand, eyes fixed on the path below, where she passed through shadow and starlight. He didn't call out. He didn't ask questions. He just watched. Because what else can you do when something you've studied your whole life walks past you and doesn't even need a name? She reached the end of the catwalk. Below, a Zodiac waited, tied to a lower service ladder. Engine silent. It wasn't Navy. It wasn't anything. Black hull, silent radio, no number, no flag, just a shape in the dark, waiting for someone not supposed to exist. She climbed down without ceremony. The water met her like it had missed her. The Zodiac peeled away without sound, heading east toward nothing, toward somewhere off-grid, somewhere real. Behind her, the carrier continued. West toward the next port. The crew would offload. Orders would change. The story would harden into something clean, something safe. She knew how it would be told. There was a systems failure. Experts responded. The breach was managed. No lives lost. The carrier survived. No names, no headlines. But the crew would remember. They would remember the woman in Civvies who fixed everything without asking. Who walked into the middle of a crisis like she had written the schematics herself. They would remember how the admiral didn't stop her. How the Marines didn't question her. How the systems responded to her touch like she'd been there before. And they would wonder who trains someone like that. Who sends her? Why isn't she on the books? And why, when she looked at a dead engine, did she look like she'd seen something worse? Down in the Zodiac, she didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the dark, her fingers tightened once on the edge of the console. Not fear, just memory. The kind that doesn't break you, just sharpens the blade. She didn't know where the next message would come from. A folded note, a redirected manifest. A black card slipped under a hotel door. It didn't matter. She wasn't waiting. She was already ready. And somewhere someone was sleeping well tonight because they thought she was just a contractor who got lucky. And somewhere else someone wasn't sleeping at all because they'd seen the patch or heard the rumor or received a classified image flagged "Do not forward" with her silhouette walking through smoke. She was never supposed to be real. But now too many people had seen her move and no one who had seen her would ever forget. Some names never make it into the files. Some heroes don't leave footprints, just quiet, irreversible shifts in the people they pass. She didn't speak. She didn't stay. She didn't ask to be thanked. But when the lights came back on, everyone looked at her differently. Not because she demanded it, but because somewhere deep down, they knew they had just seen something they weren't supposed to understand. And now you've seen it, too. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in quiet strength. Tell us in the comments, have you ever met someone who never wore their past, but changed everything with a single action? And if you believe these stories deserve to be heard, subscribe because we're just getting started.